You're listening to Unjiggered, a bartender podcast where we interview highly successful bartenders about their careers, lives, and the passion of bartending. This week we caught up with Vijay Mudaliar, co-owner and bartender at Native Bar in Singapore. We talk about his start in the local club scene, working in Operation Dagger, opening Native, and bringing his mum to the Asia 50 Best Awards. With this podcast, we want to peel back the mask and discover just how the greats really became the greats. So sit back and enjoy.
Hello, my name is Vijay Mudaliar, and I'm a co-owner and bartender at Native Bar, Singapore.
Thank you for finding the time. Finally, we get to sit down together. But to be fair, you've been an awesome host. You can really tell that Singapore is your playground and is your hometown. And the way that you look after us is awesome. So I'm glad I get to return the favor and sit down here to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I know we've been talking about this for really long, but I've been on the road, and if not, you're on the road. And then finally, it's nice to just come in the middle and have this coffee and this chat today.
How's life treating you?
Life's good. Life's always throwing a couple of curveballs, your way, and I think that's what we live for in this industry, to always challenge ourselves, and it also gives us the happiness.
That's awesome stuff. Tell us a little bit about your beginnings. So we all know you from Native, but I'm sure that being at Native was a process. So where did you start bartending? When did you fall in love with it?
So I started bartending when I was back in school, sort of a classic story of like needed to pay my school fees. I was looking for a job that paid well and allowed me to clock the hours. And I actually started out working in clubs. This is like 12 years ago. So there was not much cocktail bars, or the cocktails that I was slinging out was all, kamikazes, flaming Lamborghinis, B-52s.
The bluer the better.
The blue lagoons. So that's how I really started. So I started working out at Zouk, actually. That was my first job. A few weeks after my 18th birthday, I was working as a waiter in another bar, and I didn't really enjoy it. The bartenders always looked so much cooler, slinging cocktails. One of the days, like, my friends was working at Zouk, and one of the guys didn't show, and he called me like, "Do you want to work?" And I'm like, "When?" He's like, "Now." And I'm like, "Okay." So I turned up, and that was the beginning of it. So I basically started working in clubs my first few years, till I was 18 to 21, different styles of clubs. And then after that, I sort of moved towards more of the hotel bars, whiskey bars, wine bars.
So you did a bit of everything, huh?
Restaurant bars, and then slowly transitioning into cocktail bars about maybe 6 years ago. Yeah.
Which one was your first big cocktail bar?
I wouldn't say my big first cocktail bar, but my first experience, in a sense that I think I was always struggling, because I loved the industry, I loved bartending, but about 6 years ago was the turn of the industry in Singapore. It was really hard. I was bartending and I was earning nothing, and you were going home with the flat paycheck, and the guys that you grew up with, they had transitioned into like corporate jobs, and they were starting to do well for yourself. And here you are, you're doing something you love, but it's a struggle to even like feed yourself, And that first opportunity that got me thinking that, maybe I can actually do this proper for a living, was the chance to work with Jason Adderton when he actually opened up here. So opened up with the Unlisted Group back at that time, Poland restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first sort of experience with like a Michelin star chef, how they ran, and there were people in the kitchen back then who were like former El Bulli, so the standards were like really high, and it was a huge jump for me. And I think I got to work with guys like Gareth Evans, who was back then working for Jason, and it just brought me to a whole new world. And the bar manager back then, Stefan Ravalli, he came in, and he's like, "We're gonna do like crazy cocktails, and people are gonna enjoy it here." I'm like, "Are you sure?" I'm not really sure if the market's ready for for that style. So I think that was my first sort of experience with what an international bar should look like. And then obviously the same group, they opened up the library just about 1 year later, which was one of the few new speakeasies, in town. There was a library in front, and then you had a password, and then you go in, and then it was a cocktail bar. So I think that was my first sort of like jump into the cocktail world.
So by working with chefs, what is it that you picked up from them? Because you mentioned the fact that, you've been exposed to this sort of Michelin star mentality, and, it really opened up your eyes. What is it that specifically you picked from that?
I think working with chefs was really interesting in a sense that, we were working with some young chefs as well at that point of time, and they were so interested in our world, and we were so interested in their world. They would come after work for drinks, and they're like, what's this chartreuse, what's Amaro, what's Fernet? And they're like, okay, I really like this Amaro. Do you think we could make an ice cream out of it? Do you think we could add it in a donut glaze? And from our side, we will be like, okay, I have this ingredient, I'm juicing beetroots, and then some of the chefs will come in like, why don't you like sous vide it and then blend it into a puree? And you'll be like, what's a sous vide, back then. So I think they taught us how to understand ingredients a bit better, and like with each ingredient, what care and technique you can add to it. And from our side, we sort of show them like, there's a lot of interesting spirits out there, and eventually, there could be a cohesion between bars and chefs.
Talk to us about the library. The place is not open any longer, is it?
Yeah, it's not open anymore. But I think when the library opened, there was a few cocktail bars in Singapore. Obviously, 28, I think, had been established for a year before the library opened, and then there was Jigger and Pony, but that was it. So it was a nice little tight little group, and I think it was nice for the community back then, because people were just starting to get into cocktails, and that sort of novelty of this, like, cheeky speakeasy with the password and all that sort of just helped to promote the cocktail culture. People would come in with the open mind, and then back then we were doing drinks with like dry ice and liquid nitrogen,
yeah, of course,
and like a garnish, like 5 different garnishes over one drink. And we had a punch bowl that came in a bathtub and a rubber ducky. So I mean, looking back now, it's all like really cheesy, but back then, if we didn't have that prop or that, sort of photogenic sort of cocktails, people might not have been interested to actually try the ingredients in the cocktail, like Fernet Branca or chartreuse or all these mezcals, but some of the cutest. I remember we had this drink in a little milk bottle. It's like a sort of like a milk punch, and it had a bit of mezcal in it, and back then mezcals were just starting to come up in the market, and if it wasn't in that milk bottle, nobody would have ordered it like straight up. But the fact that it came in that sort of cutesy little milk bottle with a ribbon and a colorful straw, people were open to like, hey, I want that cocktail. And I think slowly we sort of tried to get them to experience different flavors that way.
I think it's very important to have drinks that are accessible to your guests, and I think the looks of it, like, it's very, very important element, isn't it?
Yeah.
We were talking on here with Jim Meehan, and he said that part of the success of PDT was due to the fact that the door is hidden in a phone booth and people have to walk through it, and there's this element of theater, which is very important, right?
Yep.
What happened after library?
So after library, when I was working in the group, I had a really good opportunity to go up to London to stage with the guys in Blind Pig. So this was about 7 years ago. So okay. I think it was the year where they won like Best Restaurant Bar.
2013, 2012.
2013. Yeah, 2013. So I think Gareth and Stefan from over here, they hooked it up. And that was a different experience as well, stepping behind the bar in London, seeing how the guys work over there. And the standards were like totally different, It was a bit of a shock to me, And after after work, I'm like, hi guys, how do you go home? And it's like, you take the night bus or you cycle, you know. And then over here in Singapore, after you finish work, it's like mandatory for the company to get your taxi.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my god, I've been so spoiled, you know, working in Singapore. So I think I was 23 back then, and then like first time in London looking at like cocktail bars, like primarily I've been there before, so I like, you know, doing your rounds, going to Artesian back then, you know, going to the Blind Pig, going to like Niger and checking out these bars when they were in their prime. So that was something new for me. And then I came back. I finished about 2 years with the group, and then I took a break, not really knowing what to do, I guess. And then I was just doing like some consultancy, like helping out some like neighborhood bars and restaurants pop up, and coming up with like simple cocktail programs for them. So that took me a year, and then decided to join, I guess, Operation Dagger.
Before we get to Operation Dagger, you mentioned that you've been going around bars in London. Which ones were your favorite, and how did they inspire you towards the development of your career or who you are right now?
I think back then, okay, it's been a while, but when I probably first went 2013, I think like just how busy Niger was, that was what I was looking at. I was like, wow, I went on a Monday and it was slamming, and there was a long queue. And I think in Singapore, like, we get busy, but you don't see queues, you know, like...
Yeah, to get into a bar.
Yeah, and over there I saw the queue, and the bar was slamming, and the bar itself was really tiny. I was like, oh my God, how are they like whipping out drinks for so many people, you know? I think that's one of the things that I was thinking about. And then, of course, going to the Artesian back then and seeing how they worked, and that hospitality aspect of it all, that was pretty cool. Yeah.
How long did you work in Operation Dagger for?
I worked in Operation Dagger for about 1.5 years. So that was really cool. So I was not really sure. I was doing like consultancy and stuff, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I know I wanted to work behind a bar again, but there was nothing like really calling, you know. And then I heard through the grapevine, you know, that Luke was going to open Operation Dagger, but back then he had just opened Oxwell, like he set it up over here. And then I had heard about like the rum from the guys who obviously used to work there, like Zach and the former like crew that worked at Tippling Club. So, and then they were like, oh, you know, this guy's going to open this bar, and it's going to be about like rotovap and techniques and all that. And for a long time, you know, that I think that was the angle that I was trying to move into. So I remember met Luke for an interview, but then he wanted me to work at Oxwell, and I didn't want that. I wanted to work at the new bar. And eventually, I can't remember what happened, but once they opened, and then one of his friends who was working with him had to go back to Melbourne, and there was an opening, and I was like, yeah, I'll start work right away. So that was really cool, and that was a whole new different world for me as well, you know, working with those guys. And back then when I was there, it was very much like a family, you know. So it was Luke, it was Aki, his partner, it was Yijun, it was myself, and then later on Sasha came in as well. So it was very nice, and we were doing something very different back then. I mean, they still are doing something very different, but it was a huge shock for the community, and huge shock for customers. People would come in and they would, no matter how much you explain, they just wouldn't understand what we were doing. It's like, oh, I want a Hendrix and tonic, but like, oh, the back bar has no brands, you know. We do everything ourselves, infusions from scratch, and people just wouldn't understand it. So, and then after about like 6 to 8 months working there, you started to see a shift in mentality with the consumers, and they started to get it, and the bar started to get like really, really, really busy. And it was good. It was a very good time in my career.
What did you do to make to bridge the gap in between what you guys were doing and the consumer level? Like, what were you? Did you have any trick or anything like that you did?
I think, I mean, I can't answer for Luke and Aki, but I mean, having worked with them, I think they're the kind of characters who's like, okay, this is what we're doing, and full stop. I don't think we did anything to bridge the gap, and it was like, okay, we're different. Don't forget that, and just keep pushing along that line, and we wait for people to turn
To catch up.
And product's good, so be confident.
That's crazy though, eh? You need to have balls of steel to do that, right?
Yeah, and it was nice to see a transition in the consumers as well, because even bartenders will come in, and back then this was like 5 years ago, right? Operation Dagger. Back then, like, bartenders would come in, and that was a period where like brands were like, you know, like a thing. There was brands t-shirts, there was brand caps, there was bartenders who would be tattooing like pineapples on their forearm.
Classic, yeah.
You know, for an Branca coins. So that was the period where like brand, like a loyalty to a brand was a huge thing, and we were doing the exact opposite. So bartenders would come in and they're like, you know what, the bar's okay, but I still like my brands. I like
My
to
shot
see.
of Fernet, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, eventually, like we had like Branca and all in the bar, and I think they were even trying to create their own Branca at that time. I'm not sure if they ever got to it, but you know, it's just the idea. It was just the idea that, you know, without a brand, without like that sort of idea that someone's put into you, how would you look at flavors in a neutral way? If everything sort of looked the same, you know, if there wasn't a spirit category in your drink description, and you just had to sort of experience the drink by itself, you know, that was the whole idea, I guess.
When did you start pondering the idea of opening your own bar?
I think when I was back in school, me and my friends, you know, when we were working in clubs and stuff, we always wanted our own business. I think of a group of us, you know, back in school, we always wanted our own business, and we tried a few things, you know, the classic t-shirt business didn't work out. But it was always on the back of my mind, you know, like I've always wanted to have my own business, and I think it grew a little bit more during my time when I was working at Dagger, during that era when I was hitting about 26. Yeah, that was when it started to really come down to me, like, you know, I want to start my own thing.
And what steps did you take in order for you to open your own bar? Because especially the first is not an easy task.
Yeah, so like after finishing off at Dagger, you know, we left on a good note, and I was pretty much free again, not sure what to do. So I had this idea that I wanted to open my own bar, but I was quite nervous about it. You know, I felt like I wasn't ready. So I had a bit of a pocket of time, and I looked through all the bars in the world, and I was like, okay, so I've worked at so many different styles of bars, you know, and if I could work in one more bar in the world, like, where would it be? And I looked at it and I said, okay, you know, I really like the idea of like what the guys at White Lion are doing, you know. So I got a friend that connected me to Ian Griffiths, and then he replied like, if you want to come for a Star J, like, yeah, man, let's make it work. I'm like, okay. So I took my bags, went to London again, and then I spent some time with the guys in White Lion, 2016, and that was really, really cool. And obviously Ryan was there, and obviously I worked with guys over there like Ellie, Kelsey, and Maya, and Robin, and those guys, and that was really cool.
How did that change the way you think about drinks?
There was a lot of similarity, you know, in the way that I was already thinking about drinks, but there was also a lot of things that I learned, you know, like all the little stuff that they had. And I always tell the young bartenders this, right? I always went into White Line and I was like, okay, we're going to see the best gadgets, everything. I'm going to use everything. And then we went to the basement for prep, and all they had was a sous vide and an induction cooker. That's it. that's it. And some of the craziest drinks I've had and prepped and tried came from that basement. And it all goes down to like, you know, the thought process, and obviously like Ryan, Ian, and all those guys involved in that project. You know, it's just like how you think about drinks. It's the most powerful thing. And I was just like mind blown, like with the induction and a sous vide, you know, what you could do.
That's incredible to see. I thought they had all sorts of weird stuff going on there. I didn't know they were so like. But I guess that if, as you said, right, if you have your mind right, and you know you're focusing on ingredients, and you don't need much more, right?
Yeah.
To extract flavors out of it. That's awesome. And so, when did you come up with the idea of native?
So I mean, I was working at Dagger, you know, like I wanted to. There was this part of me that wanted to break out and do something else, and it was weird because for the first like 9.5 years of my career, I was never really using any like local produce. I was always looking to like global trends and like European trends, what people are doing in London, what ingredients they're using, you know, what's happening in like New York. And then one day, you know, I just like was going out looking for like some wild sorrel, like foraging, and you know, it grows everywhere in the city. And then that just popped this small little question mark, you know, in my head. And it's like, okay, if we have wild sorrel, what else do we have? And then I started looking, and then I started to find so much more ingredients, like wild sorrel, wild jackfruit, mangoes, pepper leaves, you know, star fruits, shiny bush, so many different kind of herbs, worts, fruits. And I'm like, hey, you know, we are in a tropical climate. We are in a equator line, so there must be a few things that grow here. And then I started like just this little question just started to grow, and I was like, okay, you know, so do we have a local spirit? No, but what if we can work like regionally, right, within the region? And then like, okay, we don't have citrus, but that's okay, because for like the last few years of my career, I haven't been using much citrus as well, you know. It's the bartender's mindset of creativity to explore acidity different. Okay, I can do that, you know. Yogurt whey, kombuchas, homemade vinegars, and eventually ants, you know, which was one of our first cocktails. And that slowly led to, okay, then what can I use for my mixes? I don't have champagne. What do we have? Oh, I found like sparkling sake, you know. And then that just grew, and I'm like, okay, so now I have a basic portfolio of like spirits that are from the region. And what about, could we extend that, you know? Could we extend that to our furniture? Okay, we can. Could we extend that? Is there like local apron makers? Is there, you know, like local carpenters? And the last part was like, is there local musicians, you know? And then we just slowly sort of started to dive into each aspect. And then I had this little circle of ideas, and I'm like, you know what, this could work. And I mean, obviously having worked in bars, like have been behind bars like White Lion and Dagger, my idea was like, okay, give me a spirit, give me ingredients, put it in my hands, and it's my job to make it taste good, you know. And then I was like, brought a group of friends together. I'm like, you know what, I got this crazy idea. And that's the beginning of how it started.
How did you go about finding a site, and why did you decide to be where you are?
So I had just come back from London after the Stargate from White Lion, and then one of my chef friends who was working in the area, he's like, hey man, do you know anybody who wants to take a space? I'm like, what space? He's like, oh, it's in the second floor. I'm like, okay. What's the rent? What's it like? And he's like, yeah. He told me the numbers, and I was like, okay, can I take a look? He's like, you want to take it? I'm like, yeah. So initially when we first started Native, the whole idea was to be outside the CBD actually, because, you know, now the idea of using like local and regional feels very normal. But like 3 years ago, just 3 years ago when we first started doing it, the idea of like using a spirit from like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand would be almost considered moonshine, So I didn't really want. The idea was very different, was very unique, and I didn't want to be in the CBD and to compete with the big boys. So the whole idea was like, I spent 10 years of my life wanting to open a cocktail bar, and I want to do something that makes me happy, something that I can turn up to work every day to do. And I don't want it to be a competition. I just want to be there doing my own things. If I'm serving 7 people a day, I'm happy, as long as people come in and they leave happy. So we didn't get much sights outside there, but we saw this space and I went in and I absolutely fell in love with it. And it was an office space previously, and they had they had put carpet over the floor, they had sealed up the walls. But the history of the building was really interesting because it was about 200 years old. So we're in Amoy Street. So that's where the early settlers would land, because the port used to come all the way up to Amoy Street.
All the way there?
All the way there. So people traders and stuff, they would land in Amoy Street first as the first port, and then they would start trading. So all the shop houses used to be trading houses initially. And then eventually in the middle, they became opium dens, and then now it's all F&B. So it made sense, the building's got history. And then once we uncovered, took out the carpets, the floor, the beams, the bricks, everything's been there since day one. And we had one of the older guys who did the carpentry. He came in to do the works, and he's like, I grew up in Amoy Street, and those bricks are the original bricks that I grew up with. Yeah, he said that. So I was like, okay, if we're going to do something that represents our location, our place, our people, it only makes sense to move into a building with a bit of history. And they used to sell opium, and now we're selling alcohol, It's just
close enough, I guess.
Close enough. Yeah, so that's really how the space came about.
How do you design the menu, and how do you drive creativity in Native?
I think when we first designed the menu, the whole idea was so we don't do any classics at the bar. And the whole reason behind that was when we first started using the spirits that we have, So Singapore gins, Indian whiskies, arak from the region. I didn't really want to use them and try to compete with an international category. I didn't want to make a Indian old fashioned with an Indian whiskey and try to compare that to a regular bourbon old fashioned. Two things. I don't think that would be a right way to sort of get people to try these things. And also we wanted to let these spirits shine in their own manner, sort of, why don't we just take a different route instead of making cocktails of classics, which we've been doing for ever, and there's so many other bars doing that and they do it really well. Why don't we look at the spirit, where it's from, who makes it, what's around it, what's the history, what ingredients are used in that part of the region, where's the place, time, So the whole cocktail menu is based off location, time, people, tradition. So we have cocktails in the menu like the Peranakan. So talking about the local Peranakan people who are a very diverse mix of different cultures. They use so many interesting ingredients that, they're one of the few cultures that use them, like the buah keluak, the candle nuts, laksa leaves. So why can't we create cocktails from just the start, and why can't we create cocktails from an empty canvas instead of a canvas which has all the formulas and a twist on that? And, we hope that the cocktails that we represent, has a certain meaning, a certain idea, and people walk out, learning a little bit more about a culture, a place, an ingredient that they've not tried before. And even for myself, as a Singaporean, we've grown so quickly as a city that, a lot of us are used to, and we know basic knowledge about wine, we know basic knowledge about fine dining, but it's quite interesting to see that we don't have a basic knowledge about our own culture, our own ingredients. And when we first started, it was so interesting. We would have ingredients that, our grandparents and our parents knew, but we would show the customers okay, this is what goes into your cocktails. and they would have no clue what it is. You know, they would mistake the candle nuts for the buah keluak, or you'd be surprised how many young Singaporeans haven't had a laksa leaf like fresh. We have it in our food as a paste, but just by looking at it, they won't know what it is.
That's crazy, huh?
Yeah, so even for me, you know, like, I think I'm catching up. You know, I'm talking to the older people, the grandmas, you know, what do you guys used to use? How can we involve those ingredients back again? So that's how we think about our cocktails.
Did you get a pushback from the guests at the beginning?
It was quite interesting. We honestly thought that people would really not like what we do and find it really weird. So, you know, we had ants on the first menu, and I thought people would be creeped out, you know, and then it just turned out that people really enjoyed it from the beginning. We obviously had a few pushbacks. People come in, you know, they want to have their old-fashioned Negronis, and when you tell someone we don't do that, but we try to explain to them, okay, the reason is because we work with these ingredients and we don't have Campari, but why don't you try a cocktail in the menu? You know, it might be quite similar to what you're asking. But it was also nice that we grew very slowly. Like, you know, customers came at a very comfortable pace. So most of the nights were quiet nights, and then we could explain to customers like why we were doing what we did. And when we started the bar, we only had 10 porters on the back bar. And I honestly didn't know if there were any more, but I didn't want to wait for everything to happen and then open native. I'm like, we're going to open it and then we're going to start finding.
That makes sense, right? Yeah, because you will never be ready anyway, so you might as well start, right?
Yeah, and the idea was so crazy back then that, you know, I think I asked about 40 odd potential investors, and no one invested.
Really?
No one, yeah. Everybody thought we were crazy. Like when we said we wanted to play local music, everyone was like, what's it going to be? Is it going to be like Canto pop? Or, you know, like, or we're going to use like regional spirits? Everyone was like, oh, is it going to be like moonshine? You know, I had that thing in Phuket and in a full moon party, and it gave me a really bad headache. And I was like, no, that's not the line that we are going for. So eventually the space is just me and a couple of good friends. So one of them since I've known since I was 7, 2 since I've known since I was 17, and like 2 more like good friends over time. So it's crazy because they put the money in, and like without expectations, they're like, okay, we want to support your dream, we want to see it happen, and that's where we are. So like credit cards, bank loans, everything maxed out on the line, still very broke.
Yeah. But it's an awesome story, and I think that what I love about it is that you had to go through a process of rediscovering who you are, like, you know, from the ingredients that are used in your culture, and I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
How big is your team at the moment?
So we've really grown. When we first started out, it was me, Leon, Anbar, and Kai. So we started out with 3 at first, and then Kai joined in like a month later. And now there's, including myself, there's 5 full-timers, and then we rotate like 3 to 4 part-timers. Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your composting, because I found that very interesting.
So I think, you know, over some time, you know, the idea of just like being responsible in what we do, it just became quite natural to me. So obviously we were starting to recycle and stuff, and just having this idea of like waste in the bar, you know, when we were new, it was just sort of annoying to me. So we obviously had like trash bags and waste and stuff, and it was just quite annoying, like having to lug the trash bags out. And I've been doing it for 10 years, and I think that's one thing that I've always hated. Like end of the shift, lugging that trash bag and like just dumping it in, it's just not a good feeling, you know. So I was like, okay, we're gonna eliminate this entirely. So obviously we had trash bags and we had trash, and when we first opened, you know, we were just throwing things in there. And then one Friday I was like, hey guys, you know, from today onwards we're gonna weigh our trash. And they're like, what? they were slightly shocked. So we started weighing, and then like on a busy Friday, we would have like 800 grams of trash, the entire bar, which is still pretty decent.
Does this include bottles?
No. So
okay,
recycling aside, just like food waste.
Okay.
So, and then we just open up the trash bag and we would dig in really deep. And then we realized like, hey, this doesn't need to be thrown. We could have made like a powder, infusion, fermentation or whatsoever with that. And like that is actually recycling. That's not trash. So like I think sometimes when you just have a trash bin, it just makes it easy, and then we're like, okay, so now we've segregated, like we're recycling, but what are we doing with the food waste? And I was like, why don't we try a compost? And we had no idea how composting worked. So we just got a bin, drilled some holes, and then we started throwing some food waste. And then it was composting really well, but it was producing a lot of like nitrogen. So it was getting really wet. So we started adding like coffee grounds, which helped, but it was still like wet compost. And then we realized like over time we had to add like browns. So that's where the lotus leaf coaster comes about, because after we're done with it, we add it into the compost, and things like leaves, cardboard, coconut husk, rice hulls, all these are considered browns, and they help to neutralize the compost. So, and then we started churning with that, and then now we have compost. We're like, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to start to have to grow our own things, because it can't just sit there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we started growing all these micro herbs and all these things that eventually ends up in our cocktails, like pandan and all that, in our small little outdoor area. It's not a lot. But then we realized like, okay, we're having too much compost to the size of the things that we're growing and for the bar. So then it came to a point where, guys, we have to sit down, and just because we have a compost doesn't mean you throw everything. I want to see everything like being almost extracted to its maximum potential before it goes into the compost. So like when we first started, we had like beetroots in one of the cocktails. We made a quick set jelly from it, and then the pulp became a mocktail. The skin became like spice seasoning for one of the snacks. So by the time the pulp went into the compost, it was like totally
no more flavor to give.
Yeah, nothing left. So that's what we did, and then now we're in a very good place. I would say we have zero food waste at the bar, which is very, very nice. But I think this year where we are struggling, and I think a lot of bars in the world are struggling, and hopefully we can try to make a change, is with our recycling efforts. How do we reduce on recycling? So of course we work with the local farms, so we get like ingredients sent to us, and we have a little note that says no plastic packaging. So they bring in a tub, we sign off, they put it on the table, and then they take it back, which helps a lot. But no matter how hard we try, somehow like a plastic packaging or something comes through. So, and luckily right now we're getting like recyclable plastics at least, but hopefully we can really push it out, or find ways to use these plastics for other use. And of course, with glass recycling, we've done much better this year, because there's been a few more distilleries in town. So like the meat guys, when they deliver the bottle, once we finish, we just send the bottle back. Same for the gins. Now we're doing it with the beer bottles as well. So it just means less glass recycling for us, and hopefully we can sort of reduce it over time. I don't think there's an instant answer in the industry right now, but I think we got to work together to find different ways.
I think one step at a time, right?
Yeah.
It's very important that we don't stop at straws, and we look at other ways that we can.
Yeah.
No, but it's true. I mean, I think straws are a good start, but there's a lot to it, right?
Yeah.
And did you get a little bit of a pushback from distilleries when you asked them to bring back bottles?
I think in the beginning, yes, but then we pushed a little harder, and I think eventually they reached a point where they were like, okay, we have to start doing this. Everybody has to start being involved. So now it's in a good place.
You have seen pretty much the whole of the evolution of the Singapore cocktail scene.
Yeah.
How was it back then, and how is it now, and what are the main differences that you perceive as a local Singaporean?
I think it's crazy because I'm 30 this year,
1989.
Yeah, 89, yeah. So I'm definitely not old, but I was in a era of bartending with guys like, Peter Chua and these guys who are Zachary the Git, So I think we're in an interesting era of bartenders in Singapore where we've transitioned from old to new. So we all used to work in clubs or some dodgy joint one point in our life, and then we transitioned into like cocktail bartending. So we've got like two different sides of bartending which we've seen, and we are quite lucky. Like the old school bartending way was almost like military, right? Like if you didn't do something, someone would elbow you or knock you on the head, or you using a toothbrush to clean up a fridge, And then we transitioned to like, okay, you're making cocktails now. You're a bartender. You can do this for a living. You can put yourself on the international scene. You can put your Singapore on the international scene. So we've seen it transition quite a bit, and I think it's lucky for myself, having been through like some really hard managers and working in clubs where like when it gets busy, like on Zouk, if like a main DJ comes in, or like you're on Zouk out in Tiesto spinning and you're serving like 70,000 people and the pace is like insane, So you learn how to deal with pressure back then. And also like back then, when there wasn't like cocktail bars, everybody was serving gin and tonics and vodka cranberries. And how do you establish yourself as a bartender with your customers, So it might be like it's busy bar and 3 layers deep, and you see a regular customer, eye contact, you got his drink ready, cash plus tips right there just because of your service. So I think back then it was like you had to learn about service because you didn't have interesting drinks to sell, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that was really my foundation. And when we transitioned into the cocktail world, obviously you have to give credits to like Proof and the 28 guys, like how they really skyrocketed the cocktail scene over here. And back then, it's interesting. I always tell the younger bartenders, like we would stay up late at night at 3 or 4 and look online for the top 50 bars, and of course 28 would be there, but there would be no other Singaporean representative. And back then people wouldn't even have heard of like the Singapore bar scene. So I've been traveling to London every year, or maybe more than once a year since 2013. And when I would go to bars and like, hey, we're from Singapore, people look at you like, okay, cool.
Cool story, bro.
Yeah, and every year that changed, like 2016, oh, you're from Singapore. I've heard of, what do you think of like 28? What do you think of Dagger? What do you think of Manhattan? So I think we've worked really, really, really hard as a city to put the cocktail scene on the map. And the special thing about Singapore and where it's come is like, I will always say we have one of the best communities, in a sense that we have so many international bartenders. We have so many local bartenders, but there's no like invisible divide, Everybody comes together, everybody helps each other. We've got that group chat with over 200 bartenders, which is as much help as it is
spam,
gifs and memes, and but everybody's like ready to help each other. Like if there's a new bartender in town, he needs a couch, he needs to know a supplier, he needs a job, and within the bartender group over here as well, there's no divide of like, oh, I'm a top bartender at this bar and that's upcoming bartender. We don't mix, Everybody sort of comes along, hangs out, organizes events, and I think that's the strong point of where we've really come. And also with the help of international bartenders and local bartenders, there's a diversity in the cocktail scene. So like every bar that you go to, it's going to be very different. It's not like a lot of cocktail cities where you go to 5 bars and they all have a similar template, you know.
It happens a lot. I was recently in a couple of cities and,
Mm.
you know, like you walk into bar number 1, it's a speakeasy.
Yeah.
You know, like brown stir drinks. You go to bar number 2, speakeasy, brown stir drinks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. That's what I love about Singapore too. It's like such a diverse community, and you've got so many different bars and concepts, and people who work very hard to establish themselves as unique, right?
Yeah.
Going back to native, your menu is very interesting. How
Yeah.
many drinks do you have in there, and what's the inspiration behind the drinks that you do?
So we've got 7 drinks, and we like to switch it up quickly. Right now, the menu is really cool for me because we have like over 30 ingredients just sourced like 60 km from the bar in Singapore, which is like 60 by 40 km. So we have 30 ingredients, you know. So this menu was really pushing like, what do we really have, you know? And we have like some amazing local soy sauce that we've put into the cocktails. We're getting side cuts of bread from a local bakery, fermenting that into like a bread wine. We are foraging for like jackfruits, pepper leaves, sorrel. You know, we have some of like our herbs from our own garden, some from the local farmers, local spirits, local meat. We have this cocktail with spring water in Singapore, and 10 out of 10 Singaporeans wouldn't know that we've got a spring over here. So we're really pushing the limits of like what do we really have. It's challenging, but I think the exciting thing about what we do is there's a lot of restrictions, obviously, and with restrictions come out like true creativity, in my opinion. I'm not sure if everybody agrees with that, but you know, because when you have a lot of access, you know, you end up going back to the same thing. But we're like, okay, so we work backwards in our cocktail menus. Like so we all sit down and then we drop a map and we're like, what are we going to talk about? So, and what are we going to make the cocktails with? So we talk about like cultures, tradition, ingredients. So for example, one of the guys said, I want a cocktail to represent the Kristang people, which is sort of the getting forgotten in Singapore is the local Eurasians. They've been here since 1500s. They have their own language, they have their own culture, they have their own ingredients, and then we work backwards. Like, okay, now we have this template. How are we going to find these ingredients? And then we have these ingredients. How are we going to source them organically, sustainably, or within a perimeter of 100 km? And what can we do? So that's how we work on the cocktails. We decide what we want to do first and what we want to represent, and then we work backwards, and then we try to squeeze it in.
You were at the ceremony for Asia 50 Best this year.
Yeah.
And I've been told that you decided to bring your mom.
Yeah. I brought my mom for this. So I brought my mom and my fiance. And I think growing up, I was a really shitty kid, like real shitty. Like always, my mom was always getting called by the principal or the teachers, and I was never at home, and I was creating so much trouble, and it took me a long time to get my shit together. still getting it together, but you know, this year it was held in Singapore, and I was speaking to my mom, and I was like, hey, you know, why don't you come on over, you know, it'll be fun. Yeah. And then she had a lot of fun. She made more friends than me.
Oh, really?
And like she was talking to so many bartenders, and she was referring to them as her friends.
Really?
Yeah. So I was like, hey ma, you know, she was like, oh, it's free flow. Oh my god, you have to bring me here every year. I was like, I try. You know, we work hard, we see what happens. And she was like, just going for drinks at every bar. And then I was like, you know, I think you had too much. It's time to leave, huh? And she's like, no, I'm hanging out with my friend. Like, you can go first. And I'm like, no, we're leaving now.
And how much did this mean to you? And how was your career as a bartender perceived at the beginning?
I think, you know, my family is always been really supportive. So obviously they always want the best for you. So like, my family will always be like, are you sure this is what you want to do? You know, it's going to be tough. Yeah, you're not going to earn as much as your friends, you know. But at the same time, you know, if there's a competition or if there's something that I'm doing, they're all hands on deck, you know. And if if my mom or sister went around and they saw a little cool cup in a shop or a cool looking shaker, they'll buy it back for me. So they've always been really supportive, but I think they were just worried whether it would eventually end up to be something. And over the years, that changed as I took my career a bit more seriously. When I was a bit of a younger bartender, I would go out really late at night, 5-6 a.m. drinking, and then turn up to work at 12, and then do that all over again. And then over the years, I took it a bit more seriously, took care of my health a little bit, spent a bit more time at work, and I think they started to see that as well. And obviously, I think the point where I won the Diplomatico over here, and I came out on the papers, they had a newspaper cutting to show their friends and family.
Oh, yeah.
So I think they realized hey, this is what he wants to do, and it's starting to grow into something, and they've always been super supportive.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you see what's the future for Native?
It's quite interesting. I spent 10 years of bartending to sort of open our own space, and back then it looked very bleak, and now we have Native. It's like when I come to work, I feel like I'm living a dream. It's like we have our own space, we're doing something different, and on a Friday night, we're full and we have people who appreciate it. I'm just really grateful for where we are, and I think the future for Native is really in the next few years. We really want to involve the team a bit more. We want to push them a bit more. We want them to do better, and hopefully eventually they start doing great things, and it only looks good on Native, because we want to be a place where young bartenders can come in, sort of really experience something different, and leave being much better.
Awesome. One last question I asked to everyone. If you could choose your very last drink, what would that drink be?
My very last drink. So I always say the next one, I'm the kind of person who doesn't really do things the same each time. So if I had a cocktail, I won't have the same one for the next round. So if it's going to be my last drink, I want it to be like a surprise, like something new,
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much for your time. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you, brother.
We hope you enjoyed our interview with Vijay. We are Unjiggered Media on Instagram, and you can follow our personal accounts at mmadiotti89 for Michele, Alex J. Murphy for myself, and Adrian Bessa for Adrian. Thank you for listening.